Okay, today's video is going to be a little bit of a spicy one. We're going to be reading 1-star reviews of some of my favorite books ever. If you're new here, I'm Jananie and this is my channel, This Story Ain't Over, and I have a tendency to really love some books that tend to have some polarizing views. Some of my favorite books tend to have some middling star ratings, and a lot of people either love or hate them. So for this video, we're going to go through about 5 of my favorite books that have that 3.5-ish star rating, and we're going to go through their 1-star reviews on Goodreads. We're going to start spicy with one of my recent favorites, and that is My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Ottessa moshfegh. I read this for a vlog that will be coming out shortly after this video, and I honestly just really loved the book. There were so many things that just hit home for me as a mental illness girly, and I appreciated the writing so much. However, this book does have a very unlikable main character who is intentionally unlikable. She is a horrible, awful person. She is mean and rude and entitled, and she is meant to be that way because the book is essentially a satire, but I can see how other people who have read the book probably hated that aspect or hated the fact that the book doesn't have much plot to it and that, you know, it just goes all over the place, even though that was something that I personally really loved. With that said, we're gonna get started. Let's go to the 1-star reviews for this book. Okay, Ash says, TLDR, I fucking hated this book. What a strong opening. My Year of Rest and Relaxation could have been good. I was expecting something like You Too Can Have a Body Like Mine. I don't know this book. A weird, disturbing book about a young woman dissociating from modern society. Instead, I got 300 pages of vapid bullshit that seems unreasonably proud of itself. If you're here looking for recommendations, I'd give this one a pass and read The Kleeman instead. Damn, that was a good one. I feel like this person just really didn't enjoy the book overall. Okay, it looks like this person has more to rant about, so let's see. Another entry in the baffling women can be assholes too movement. My Year of Rest and Relaxation is all smoke and mirrors. Moshfegh is a good enough writer on a sentence level to make it seem like her book is about something, but I can assure you that it is absolutely not. There is so little substance in the actual text that I'm not even sure how to go about this review. Okay, so it looks like the person here pulled out some main themes. The characters are so unlikable, it's so weird and dark and disturbing. The book is a detailed example of what it's like to be depressed, and they do say, sure, I'll give it this one, which I appreciate. Overall, this review just like points out all of the things that I already expected people to hate about the book, like the unlikable main characters, meandering plot, the way it's just weird and disturbing and dark, but those are exactly the things that I loved about this book. How dark and disturbing and weird it was. Like, this is a main character who essentially tries to sleep a whole year of her life away rather than killing herself, like committing suicide, because she is just so depressed. And she essentially takes like all of these different drugs to try to put herself to sleep for this entire year, her year of rest and relaxation. So the premise itself is just absolutely ludicrous, but the book does really portray a woman who is going through one of the darkest depressions and is sort of in a mission of self-preservation, you know, getting herself to sleep rather than actually taking her life. I know I'm speaking a little bit flippantly about this subject, but as a bipolar girly with many dark depressions and having been suicidal before, I feel like I have a pass to talk about this flippantly. Ooh, okay, we have a 1-star review from another booktuber, which is Chandler Ainsley, who I absolutely love. She's so awesome. Go check out her channel because she's got amazing taste. And you know what? I'm not even offended that like she didn't like this book because I can see how you wouldn't like this book. So Chandler says, it's rare to enjoy both the writing and the concept for a book and then totally hate the execution. Fair? But I don't think that a self-obsessed and sort of traumatized wasp giving catty commentary juxtaposed with the idea of sleeping for a year really worked. I certainly wanted it to, but this left me very empty. I think I'm too dumb to really get this kind of intellectualism. I don't think she's too dumb. I think Chandler is very valid in her opinion on this book, but I do feel like depending on who you are, you're going to react to this book differently, and this is why reading is so subjective. Me as a bipolar depressed girly and as someone who has gone through like lots of mental illness struggles, and as someone who has suffered a lot of the things that the main character goes through in the book, it felt very familiar to me. So all of the dark and disturbing aspects of it felt familiar and normal to me, and they didn't bother me that much. Whereas I can see someone who is more mentally stable reading this book and just finding it kind of ridiculous and, you know, unnecessarily dark. I think it's just a matter of perspective. But one thing I sort of agree with in Chandler's review is that she talks about how the main character is self-obsessed and a traumatized wasp. giving catty commentary, and you know, that didn't really work for her. And I can see how for other people that also wouldn't work for them, you know, just watching this like privileged girl give this catty commentary and like be a bitch. But I think for me it worked really well because to me it was so obviously satire, and how it sort of added this like ridiculous brevity to the overall feeling of this being a dark and sad book. Because like just imagining this book from the perspective of someone who's like marginalized and, you know, actually doesn't have many privileges, and then them trying to do this whole situation, I think it would have just been depressing overall rather than being like semi-entertaining and funny while also being depressing. Anyways, those are my thoughts. Let's read a couple more here. This book is horrible. I'm not one of those people who says I just don't get it. I understand exactly what this book is trying to do. This book has no deep message, nor is it a stroke of genius from its writer. It is a book about grief and depression and how it brings out the worst in us and how we want to escape from the world around us. But life is worth living and blah, blah, blah. Not only do I not like this book, I also don't respect it. I don't respect its writing, its message, its plot, or its ending. This is not a good book. It's pseudo-intelligent. It makes a mockery of its own subject matter and is insufferable to read. I know our narrator being insufferable is the point, and if that works for you, great. But in order for that to work for me, I need a purpose, and this book's only purpose for that is grief and depression. So it feels hollow, flat, and thin. Honestly, I see these arguments. Like, I can see many people having similar thoughts. But again, for me, this book worked so well. I loved how it was being pseudo-intelligent and kind of pretentious, really. I loved how insufferable our main character is. I loved how hollow she was at some points in the book. I loved how dark it was. Now, this person's point about it being flat and thin, I can kind of see. Like, the book is relatively monotone throughout the entire narrative, and the vibe kind of stays consistent. It gets a little bit more urgent towards the end, but for the most part, it's the same sad, depressing, weird, and ridiculous vibe. And I can see how that would bother some people. But for me, that felt so realistic because that's what depression feels like. It just feels like this flat, hollow thing. And often depression doesn't let you have the peaks or the valleys or the anything. You just feel this. And so that I really liked. But yeah, I agree. It is a little bit flat. This was so boring and absolutely no one was likable. I assumed I'd feel some sort of kindred spirit with a depressed woman who decided to sleep her life away, but there was simply no meaning to anything that happened. She was horrible to her best friend, and that had no meaning. She took a treasure trove of pills every day, and that had no meaning. She slept for 4 months, waking every 3 days to eat, and that had no meaning. I'm walking away from this having learned nothing about depression or anxiety or suicidal thoughts. In fact, I don't truly believe there's any messaging in this book. It's just about a mean woman who slept. It's just about a mean woman who slept. I feel like that should be like the blurb on this book because it's not true. This review is kind of funny to me because they're like, oh, you know, I'm walking away from this having learned nothing about depression, anxiety, or suicidal thoughts. But like, this isn't meant to be an educational book. This is not a memoir. This is not a nonfiction. This is not even like a uplifting, you know, contemporary fiction. This is quite literally a satirical portrayal of depression, anxiety, and suicidal thoughts. And it is actually very realistic if you have ever experienced any of those things. Okay, wait, I have one more because this is actually so freaking funny. American Psycho, but the grisly murders have been replaced with a series of naps. This, again, should seriously be, like, the blurb on the front of the book, because that would make me read this. Alrighty, we're gonna move on to another favorite of mine that's actually quite similar to My Year of Rest and Relaxation, and that is Big Swiss by Jen Beagin. This book basically features this, like, middle-aged woman who is sort of upending her entire life. She moves to New York, she leaves behind her old life, and she's now working as a transcriber for this sex therapist. And while she's transcribing these sessions, she starts to fall in love with this one woman that the sex therapist is treating, and our main character Greta starts calling this woman Big Swiss. And when she accidentally sort of starts meeting Big Swiss in like real life situations outside of the transcriptions, she sort of starts to use the things she knows from the sessions to get into Big Swiss's life and maybe woo her in a way. This is like a really messy midlife crisis, mental illness girly, sapphic girly book. It is by no means perfect, and it does have a lot of crazy things going on, and it is definitely meant to be satirical, and I think that's why I loved it. Like, it was just so funny. It was just so dark at some points. Greta is, again, a mental illness girly. She is dealing with a lot, and as a mental illness girly myself, like, I just appreciated all this so much. On that note, I did want to say that I think there is this tendency for people to be like, oh, these are such heavy topics and people are suffering from mental illness and these are very serious things and they should be afforded, you know, serious tones. But as someone with mental illness, I think oftentimes we are tired of reading these serious stories about our serious struggles, and sometimes we want to just relate in a fun and comical way rather than thinking about the awful and very serious nature of our mental illnesses. Like, yes, I'm happy to read about, you know, the experience of bipolar disorder from other people, from other memoirs and nonfiction, because that's what those genres are meant to do. But in fiction, I honestly don't care for it being serious. I would rather have it be funny and satirical. And this doesn't mean I don't like contemporaries or like fiction books that involve main characters seriously dealing with their mental illnesses in like a serious way. But I feel like there's space for both, like both the satirical and funny and the serious and uplifting. You know, if you are looking for a sort of more slightly serious and more uplifting mental illness story, I would definitely check out Never Been Better by Leanne Toshiko Simpson. It's a recent release and the main character has bipolar disorder and she's dealing with that, but it's also kind of like a fun rom-com book too. So yeah, definitely go check it out. Tangent aside, let's get back to Big Swiss. Let's go look at these 1-star reviews. So what I'm expecting in these 1-star reviews is that people are gonna hate the main character because she can be unlikable. They're gonna hate her questionable morals. They're gonna hate how ridiculous all the characters are. They're gonna hate how weird the book gets, how flippant it is, and so much more. So let's see what everyone has to say. Okay, let's start with this first one. You know those comments about how movies and TV shows are being written as if they're tweets? This is exactly that, but in book form. This opening statement is just funny because I don't disagree with it. Like, the book is sort of like reading a bunch of tweets and hot takes, and it's just hilarious to me. All right, this person continues to say, what a weird ass story. Literally no part of it made any sense. Agree. The reason why Big Swiss was in therapy was not compelling enough to actually maintain her there when she clearly hated every single part of it. Instead of the emotional detachment of every character working in favor of the story, it made me also not engage emotionally with the story at all. Why would Big Swiss even be interested in Greta? She's clearly a no-nonsense, very accomplished woman, and Greta is ... pathetic? Oh, this is so funny because it's so true, but like, I loved those aspects of the book. Like, yes, Greta's pathetic and she doesn't know what she's doing with her life, but like, the chemistry just worked so amazingly for me. Like, it's not an uncommon thing for beautiful, accomplished women to fall for pathetic people. Another thing that I totally agree with that they pointed out is the emotional detachment of the story. Basically, every character is like emotionally detached from everything and you never really get deeply into their emotions, but it's like intentional. It's part of the satire. And for me, I loved that because it made for this like really funny and ridiculous story that also by the end really delved into the main character's struggle with her mental illness. She is intentionally avoiding all of her emotions and dealing with her own mental illness or mental health throughout the book until it like fully hits her in the face at the end. The sex also sounded really fucking pathetic and just ... bad. Why were they even having sex? It sounded awful. And don't even get me started on the casual bigotry, the I'm a Gen X white woman humor that permeated the entire book and made it absolutely insufferable. There was not an ounce of creativity in this and it was fucking painful. To be honest, I only finished this so I could be 100% certain it sucked, and it fucking did. So their opinions on the sex, honestly, I see the point because the sex scenes are kind of like over dramatized and sort of overly ridiculous, but like I love that. And then the whole casual bigotry, Gen X white woman thing, yeah, that is an element of the book, but again, I think it's more meant to be satirical, and I can see how other people would be more upset with this. To me, it was just part of the story, like this is the character, and I feel like that doesn't mean that this is a reflection of what the author thinks, this is just the character. But again, I totally understand people who were not happy with that aspect, and I can see how that totally turned them off the book. I absolutely love the last line of this review because they're just like, I needed to make sure it sucked. And that's just like a level of petty that I aspire to be. Alrighty, this next one seems spicy. Let's go. If your B+ ninth grade creative writing assignment you were really proud of got leaked to a bunch of interns who were told they needed to find at least one sapphic manuscript at the end of the year and all other standards could be eliminated. Praying that 2023 brings a year where Chelsea G. Summers and Jen Beagin get together and have $26 eggs Florentine at a place closed on Tuesdays somewhere between Chelsea and Hudson and take out all their sadistic joke-telling desires on each other so I never have to read something this unbearably atrocious again. Good luck, Jodie Comer. Oh my god. Sorry, I couldn't stop laughing while reading that. I don't know who Chelsea G. Summers is, but I'm assuming it's another author that, you know, writes similarly to Jen Beagin. I love how specific this person gets. People are so creative and I just love this so much. Alright, here's another one. I do not understand the great reviews this book is getting. It's terrible. The story is about a woman, Greta, who is a hot mess, taking a job transcribing a weird wannabe therapist Ohm's client sessions in a small town. As she listens to one woman describe her traumatic abuse, she becomes fixated on her, nicknames her Big Swiss, and stalks her until they start having a lesbian affair. Big Swiss is married and has zero emotions. They have weird, awkward sex a few times, are super condescending and mean to each other, have zero in common, and don't really get along at all, but yet they fall in love. Then a few other characters have things happen to them, bees and donkeys are discussed because they live at Greta's house, and then the story is over. The writing is not great, the love story is bizarre, and there really were no great life lessons. How people are raving about this book is beyond me. Again, this is so funny because none of these things are not true, but I loved these aspects of the book. I loved the weird, awkward sex. I loved how Big Swiss had no emotions and Greta had no emotions. I loved how weird and mean and condescending they were to each other. I loved the fact that Greta was a hot mess. All of these things were part of the charm of the book, and yeah, I can see how people hated this, but I just loved it so much. Alrighty, we're gonna move on to something that's slightly less polarizing and ridiculous, and that is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. Silvia Moreno-Garcia is one of my favorite authors ever. She does have a few books that I didn't really like, but there's a lot of her books that I really do love, and this book happens to be probably my favorite of her books. This book essentially follows her main character, Noemi, who receives a letter from her cousin who has recently gotten married and moved to the Mexican countryside with like her English husband. And her cousin is essentially saying these weird things like her husband is trapping her in the house and there are like people walking through walls and there are all these strange things going on. So Noemi travels to the house and stays with everyone there and tries to figure out what's sort of going on in the house and with these people, and it all turns into this really dark and creepy situation. I should also say that this is slightly historical. I forget when it's set. It's like the 18 or 1900s. All right, let's start. This first one says 3 things. 1, I want to start a petition to use this gorgeous cover for a book worthy of its beauty. 2, there's nothing Mexican or Gothic about this novel. 3, it's blasphemous to compare this book to Rebecca or Wuthering Heights. Anyway, I give it -5 stars for wasting my time. I find point number 2 kind of funny because they're like, there's nothing Mexican or Gothic about this book. The whole book is Gothic. The Mexican part I can kind of see because although it's set in the Mexican countryside, most of the main characters are not Mexican. Noemi is, but like her heritage doesn't really come through as much, but I think it's sort of intentional. She's trying to fit into that society. These English people who are settled in the Mexican countryside, like this is their privilege. All a part of history and is not untrue. I personally feel like this has a similar vibe to Wuthering Heights, but it's not quite the same sort of like plot, so I can see why you wouldn't want to compare it to that book. All right, this next review has a similar thought process. It's at least 1.5 stars. This book is deceptive and bland. It promises Mexico, but the setting could be England and you'd never know the difference. It promises the 1940s. It could have been 2020 with the explanation that cell phones don't work at high place. Okay, that I disagree with. Also, the dialogue felt very modern and false. It promises horror, yawn. This is predictable, slow, not even close to scary. Every character feels exactly like the others, and Noemi in particular is pretty one note. And I'm sorry, but this book is just so dumb. Okay, so the whole promising Mexico and the setting could have been England. Again, these are these wealthy English titled people who have settled in the Mexican countryside and are essentially just living their own microcosm of England in the Mexican countryside and employing Mexican houseworkers. So yeah, I can see how the title and the premise might be a little misleading, but it's not intentional on Silvia Moreno-Garcia's part that none of the Mexican heritage really comes through while they're in this house, because that's what's horrific about this house. Like, these English people taking over, using these Mexican workers. This is colonialism. This is how it works. I think the titling of this book as Mexican Gothic didn't really do it any favors. I feel like it could have been named something else and it would have made a little bit more sense, because the book is more about colonialism and eugenics and so many other topics, and it's less about the Mexican heritage, and it's more about how these Mexican workers are being exploited. I feel like that's kind of lost with this title. The point about Noemi being one note, I can semi-see. She's not the most 3D character, but I do feel like she had some gumption to her. I did like her. She's not necessarily unlikable. She's definitely like a curious person and a strong-willed person. But beyond that, I can see how she's slightly forgettable. Alrighty, this next one seems a little bit spicy. Let's go. How the actual fuck did this win Best Horror? It was truly awful. One of the worst books I've ever read. First off, this was atrociously boring. So boring. Oh my god, I wanted to stab my eyeballs out the entire time I was reading this, and I spent most of my time skimming or flipping pages looking for something important before moving on. The pace of the book is slower, but I think it's intentional and it adds the suspense and it builds slowly, and I personally really like that. Second, this was not scary at all and just the stupidest concept. God, this was so bad and cheesy. Thirdly, is this actually adult? Because it 100% read like badly written YA. Wow, I've never heard that one, and I do disagree. No one was developed, the plot was boring AF, nothing was interesting, and the reasoning behind everything was eye-roll worthy. It was like watching a bad horror movie, and not the fun kind. I hate it. Wow, what a waste of 5 days of my life. Don't read this. This sucked. Throw this book in the to donate pile. It's so funny to me the way that people write their 1-star reviews, like they're so dramatic. Not to say that I haven't written my fair share of dramatic Goodreads reviews, so, you know, this is all, again, stupid commentary that means nothing, and you should not take me seriously. Okay, this next one says, I really liked this for the first half. It was reading like a slow burn mystery, and I understood why people would have been bored by it, but I was feeling it. I was enjoying myself. But then the author absolutely lost the plot. By 60%, I was so bored and so disengaged. I punishingly forced myself to finish. By 80%, I wanted to DNF so bad, but I made myself finish. This ended up being such a mess, convoluted, ridiculous. Mushrooms? Question mark, question mark, question mark, question mark. So if you've read this book, mushrooms are a significant theme in this book. I loved the mushrooms. I loved the way that things unfold in this book, but I can see how, to some people, the mushrooms thing may have been ridiculous. Alright, this is the last one that I'll read. Just awful. There's no way I could finish this. The main character is a shallow, spoiled little rich girl who wants to be an archaeologist but doesn't like being out in nature. The writing is clumsy and uneven. Nope. Alrighty, moving on to Natural Beauty by Ling Huang. This is another recent favorite of mine. It's another horror. It came out last year and it was probably one of my favorite books of the entire year. It follows a main character who used to be a piano prodigy, and that sort of career falls apart. And then she finds herself sort of getting recruited by this woman to join this company called Holistic and work there as one of the like retail staff. And it's like this beauty brand, and they sell these holistic beauty treatments. And as she works there, she starts to discover that something sinister is kind of going on and something horrific with these treatments and the company. This is like definitely a weirdly paced book, and by the end the whole plot is like ridiculous and weird, but I loved it so much, and it had such a great commentary on the idea of like what natural beauty is and what beauty is and how we all strive for this level of beauty and perfection. And so overall I really love the entire thing, but it did get super weird by the end, and I can see how people would have hated that or thought it was ridiculous. So I'm imagining that a lot of the reviews are going to be about that. Okay, this first one goes, too slow for me. It gives you too much details in things that are ultimately not that important, but too vague for things that should be more explored or detailed. There are sprinkles of things that are there for shock, but are just as shallow as the characters. That fails to keep you completely engaged, but just as any other train wreck, you are ultimately unable to look away for more than a few minutes. So there's that at least. Agree about the concept of things being kind of vague, but I do think it was very, very intentional on the author's part making some aspects vague, because the whole thing is so ridiculous at some point and so horrific and sort of dystopian that it doesn't really feel like real life, but it's making a really great commentary on real life. And so I think at some point you do have to just suspend your disbelief and just let it happen. Now, the thing about being unable to look away, that's definitely a thing. Like, even as it gets ridiculous towards the end, you're like, I can't stop reading. All right, this next one goes, if you are into reading about women breastfeeding gibbons, casual mentions of cannibalism, and several unnecessary descriptions of areolas and nipples, including this gem, her nipples look like the soft snouts of baby pigs, then this book may be the right fit for you. I need a cleanse after reading this. Okay, that line that they pulled out was actually so funny and I loved it. The book does have very casual mentions of a lot of things and a lot of weird things. So again, this book is weird. So if you're going into it, it's weird. The fact that they say I need a cleanse after reading this is so funny, because the whole concept of beauty and beauty products and cleansers. And yeah, I see the pun. Okay, the last one I'm going to read for this book is, this was disturbing and it made me physically ill. It was slow and so many things were introduced for pure shock value and then just pushed to the side. Despite how weird it started off with, I decided to keep going, and I desperately wish I had stopped. I was intrigued by the synopsis, but it just didn't deliver for me. Yeah, the whole like shock value thing seems to be a common theme across many of the reviews, which I find interesting. Yeah, there's a lot of weird things that are just like inserted there, but I think the fact that they are planted there without too much explanation is what made the book intriguing and creepy and horrific. Anyways, moving on to the final book, we are going to be looking at reviews of Cleopatra and Frankenstein by Coco Mellors. This was again one of my favorite books of 2023, and I loved so many different aspects of it. And many of the aspects that I do love about it are the ones that I think other people hated about it. I loved how unlikable all the main characters were. I loved how they were all pretentious, entitled people going about their lives in New York and trying to be, you know, avant-garde and hipster and cool, when it's obvious that they're trying too hard and they're just ridiculous. I loved the sort of toxic relationships and the portrayal of those, and how the love story isn't really a love story. I loved all the mental health and mental illness struggles in this book. Many of the characters are going through different things. There's also like substance abuse issues and like alcohol abuse issues. All of that is woven in there, and to some people it may seem like flippant, but I think for me it was done so well. Like, it was such a realistic depiction of mental illness and addiction, while also just being like an entertaining read. The book is semi-satirical at many aspects, and it is also intentionally giving you these unlikable characters who have these very, very messy lives, and you are just seeing it all unravel and happen. But I think throughout all of it, you can see the parts where you relate to many of the characters who are very unlike yourself, but you know, they're going through similar struggles. I think the overall sense of loneliness amongst all these characters is what is so compelling. Let's go. This first one. Everyone is lying about this book. All right, this next one is super long, so I'm only going to read out the first sentence, but it says, "It's so depressing to know that this terrible, poorly thought out book took 7 years to write." Ooh, I'm actually going to read another section of it. It says, "The story dragged painfully and tried so hard to be not like other girls that it became like every other girl," which really isn't bad, because I too am just like other girls, except that it's false advertising. And also the comparison to Sally Rooney is offensive, because Rooney can write very well. Well, I can't say the same for Mellors, and self-insert is atrocious. What? Mellors does not have the writing skill, nor does she have the ability to capture certain aspects of life that Rooney can so naturally do. Mellors also does not have the ability to make her insufferable characters compelling like moshfegh, which I disagree with. So I am absolutely baffled by the hype that this book is receiving and the continuous comparison of the authors. I think this book, like Ottessa Moshfegh's books, does have unlikable main characters, but it's just a little bit less obvious. They are sort of introduced as if you may like them and you may want to root for them. But as you go on, you start to realize that they're all horrible people and they're all making stupid mistakes. Whereas I feel like Ottessa Moshfegh's characters are just so like over exaggerated to a point that you know for sure that they're like insufferable. So this is just like more of a realistic portrayal of just awful people in the world. The whole connection to Sally Rooney, I can also see how that doesn't feel right to them. I've read 3 of Sally Rooney's books and I hated 2 of them and I liked one of them. It's a little similar to Conversations with Friends, which is the one Sally Rooney book that I actually do like, whereas the others I hated because they were just boring in my opinion. Whereas this book I feel like is entertaining. Like, it's kind of like Gossip Girl. It's a little trashy, but you can't stop watching. Okay, next review. deleted my old review because I was senselessly ranting, but I still do think this felt painfully self-indulgent, more so than the works of Sally Rooney, of which this book has been exhaustively compared to. Though I love it, I can admit that this type of literary genre or niche does tend to not have the substance you'd expect an overtly hyped book to have, and often appears juvenile. Yet in the defense of Rooney, she was here first and filled a role. You can't just slather more cement on top of an already filled hole and expect the outcome to be smooth. That last line. Oh, I find that so funny. But I also just find it funny that this person is like, oh, you know, Sally Rooney has like full control over this genre. Like no one else can compare. Wow, this next one. DNF, I would happily burn this book. Done reading about pretentious straight people. Glad I didn't waste money on this book, lol. Maybe this is just a matter of perspective on my end, because like I know this is about like pretentious white straight people, which is not typically something I like to read. But to me, this was just like them being so stupid, and it was just so entertaining. And so it was kind of like reading it to sort of hate watch these people do their thing. However, I will say that to me, despite all of this white privilege going on, the book does have a very good representation of addiction and mental illness. And I think that aspect is sort of lost on people. And I think it's very natural for it to be lost on people if they've never experienced anything like that. But as someone who, you know, has mental illness and has grown up around addiction, like all of that felt very familiar. This one is so funny. Reads like it was written for Tumblr. Romanticizes addiction, self-harm, and suicide. The main character has insufferable manic pixie dream girl vibes. She smokes, she paints, she's depressed, but in a sexy way. Maybe okay if you read it like a rom-com, but annoying because it's pretending to be deeper. Eleanor's chapters read like they were meant to be a series of tweetable quotes. That's it. That's the best one. Oh my god, I love this review. I don't have much to say to this other than like I can see how someone would see the book this way, but to me, like, it was all intentional. Cleo is meant to be a dumb bitch who's like pretentious and acting like she's this cool artsy girl who has like this tortured past. The nice thing that this book does is that it's not just from like the two main characters' perspectives, it's from other perspectives as well. So as you start to read from other perspectives, you start to see how stupid the other characters are and how self-absorbed and obsessed they are. And so once you're outside of the characters, you're like, yeah, she's just this manic pixie dream girl. I think the element of romanticizing addiction, self-harm, and suicide, I honestly don't agree with it. I think often you can get muddled between the line of representing these things in a realistic way, the way life really is, which is messy and dark and atrocious, and then also accidentally romanticizing it as well. Like, I can see how for some people this book romanticizes these aspects because it shows some really graphic scenes of like self-harm and suicide. So like, look up trigger warnings when you're reading this book. For me, it added to the book in some way. I don't think that we should like spend pages upon pages, you know, describing a suicide scene or like a self-harm scene. But I do think there's an element of like people who have been in some of these situations will, one, find it triggering, but two, may feel seen. Like a lot of the suicide related and like depression related scenes felt very familiar to me. And that was part of why I kind of enjoyed this book more. I don't know, it's an interesting topic and I feel like there's different opinions. Like if this was a YA book, I think all of those scenes would be really extraneous and like bad. But this is an adult book, so you're going into this with a level of mental maturity. And so you can choose to sort of read things a little bit critically. I think as a reader, we should be able to critically assess the fact that Cleo's like a deeply depressed and mentally unwell woman who is doing these things. And so this is just part of her story, and I don't think that necessarily romanticizes the situation. Anyways, those are my deep thoughts on this topic and others. And on that note, thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed watching me react to these 1-star reviews. Honestly, this was just such an entertaining time, and I would definitely do this again. I think the element of doing this with books that I know objectively have aspects that other people would hate made it a much more fun experience. And if you are one of the people whose reviews I read out on this video, please do not take offense. This is publicly available information that you have put out in the world, and I am just some dumb girl on the internet talking about it and reacting, so please do not take me seriously. Anyways, let me know if any of these reviews made you want to pick up any of these books, or anything I said made you want to pick up any of these books, and let me know down below if there's any books that you think that I should read that are similar to any of these books, and if you'd like to see me react to 1-star reviews of them later on. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate you immensely, and if you enjoyed seeing some of those names up on the credits at the beginning of this video, then definitely go check out my binder community down below. You can join and support me and my channel, and I will give you a shout out and thank you at the beginning of each of my videos. As always, if you haven't already, go check out my Instagram, Goodreads, and TikTok, and I will see you in my next video. So please remember that this story ain't over. Bye!